when code replaced trust. For centuries, trust was the invisible glue of every financial system. People trusted banks to hold value. They trusted governments to enforce rules. They trusted intermediaries to keep records honest. Then, quietly, code offered a different promise. To understand why this shift matters today, we need to examine how trust has been changing. Modern finance grew increasingly complex. Transactions moved faster than oversight. Decisions became abstract, distant, and difficult to question. For many, trust was no longer earned through transparency. It was enforced through necessity. Out of this environment emerged a radical alternative, a system that did not ask users to trust institutions. Instead, it asked them to trust mathematics. Algorithms replaced judgment. Verification replaced reputation. Rules were enforced automatically without discretion. At first, this idea felt counterintuitive. Trust had always been human, based on relationships, authority, and enforcement. Code offered none of that. It did not care who you were. It did not recognize intent. It only executed instructions. Yet, that indifference was the appeal. Code could not lie. It could not bend under pressure. It could not quietly change terms after the fact. Once deployed, it followed its logic relentlessly. For those disillusioned by opaque systems, this felt safer. The early networks framed trust as a vulnerability. Every trusted party was a potential failure point. Every intermediary introduced risk. Remove them, and the system becomes stronger, at least in theory. This reframing, as these systems expanded, the promise of automated trust met the reality of human behavior at scale, revealing tensions that no algorithm had been designed to resolve. Code could verify transactions with perfect consistency, but it could not understand context, intent, or consequence, and that limitation slowly began to surface in ways few had anticipated. The more value flowed through automated rules, the more unforgiving those rules became. Errors were not corrected by conversation or judgment, but by irreversible outcomes written permanently into shared records. A single mistake, whether technical or human, could echo endlessly, not because anyone wanted it to, but because the system had no concept of mercy or exception. This rigidity exposed a deeper problem. While trust had been removed from institutions, it had quietly reassembled around developers, maintainers, and early adopters whose decisions shaped the system's evolution. Most users could not audit the code themselves, nor could they meaningfully participate in governance debates that required deep technical understanding and constant attention. Trust had not disappeared. It had simply become abstract, indirect, and harder to challenge. As networks grew more complex, layers of tools, interfaces, and financial instruments formed on top of the original code. Each layer reintroduced intermediaries, not by design but by necessity. Wallet providers, exchanges, and platforms became gateways, concentrating influence while claiming neutrality. The system still ran on code, but access increasingly depended on companies. At the same time, automation began to outpace accountability. When failures occurred, there was no clear line of responsibility. Code had executed as written. Participants had followed incentives. Yet losses were real and consequences were unevenly distributed. The absence of trust did not eliminate blame. It made it harder to assign. This environment rewarded speed and certainty over reflection. Automated decisions happened faster than regulation, faster than legal interpretation, and faster than social consensus. By the time problems were recognized, they were already embedded in the system's history, impossible to reverse without breaking the very rules that defined it. What emerged as a paradox. A system designed to remove human weakness was now amplifying it, locking assumptions, biases, and incentives into logic that scaled globally without pause. Trust had been replaced, yes, but with something colder, faster, and far less forgiving. And as this realization spread, the question shifted once again, from whether code could replace trust to whether trust could ever be removed from systems built by humans at all. The conflict deepened as automated systems collided with a world built on interpretation, negotiation, and human judgment. Financial history had always relied on flexibility during stress, on pauses, interventions, and negotiated outcomes when rigid rules threatened collapse. But code did not pause. It did not renegotiate. It simply continued, block after block, execution after execution, regardless of circumstance. As markets built on automated trust expanded, volatility became amplified rather than absorbed. Sudden movements triggered cascading reactions, liquidations executing instantly, contract enforcing themselves without regard for broader consequences. What once would have unfolded over days now happened in minutes, sometimes seconds, leaving participants disoriented and powerless to respond. This speed created a new kind of asymmetry. Those with technical expertise, faster access, and automated tools gained a decisive advantage. Algorithms competed against algorithms, while human users lagged behind, reacting to outcomes already finalized. The system appeared neutral, but outcomes increasingly favored those who could operate at machine speed. Governance struggled to keep pace. Decisions about upgrades, fixes, and risk mitigation required coordination across global communities with conflicting incentives. Every proposal sparked debate, suspicion, and fragmentation. There was no shared authority to impose compromise, only voluntary alignment, which became harder as financial stakes grew larger. As complexity increased, faith in the system began to depend less on understanding and more on belief. Users trusted that the mechanisms would hold, that incentives would balance, that catastrophic failure would somehow be avoided. This belief was rarely articulated, but it shaped behavior nonetheless, encouraging risk-taking built on assumptions rather than certainty. The buildup was gradual but relentless. More capital flowed in. More financial products wrapped themselves around automated trust. Lending, derivatives, and synthetic instruments multiplied, each one depending on the flawless execution of underlying code. Fragility grew not from weakness, but from interdependence. When stress tests arrived, they exposed how thin the margin truly was. Minor disruptions triggered outsized reactions. Liquidity vanished without warning. Systems behaved exactly as designed, and yet the results felt chaotic. Precision did not guarantee stability. In some cases, it undermined it. The build-up toward the emotional peak was no longer theoretical. It was experiential. Participants began to realize that removing discretion also removed shock absorbers, that eliminating trust did not eliminate risk. It merely changed how risk surfaced, faster, sharper, and harder to contain. And with that realization, the conflict reached its breaking point. The climax did not arrive as a single collapse or a dramatic failure broadcast of the world. It arrived as recognition, a slow, unsettling awareness spreading through markets, institutions, and communities that something fundamental had changed, and that it could not be reversed without unraveling everything built on top of it. Automated trust had become authoritative. Decisions once debated by people were now finalized by execution. Appeals were impossible. Reversals were extraordinary. The system did not ask whether outcomes were fair, sustainable, or socially acceptable. It only asked whether conditions had been met, and if they had, it acted. This was the moment when the promise revealed its full cost. Removing trust from people did not remove power from systems. It transferred into logic that could not be questioned once deployed. Accountability became diffuse. Responsibility became abstract. And yet, consequences remained painfully concrete. The resolution lies not in rejecting code, but in understanding its limits. Automation excels at consistency, but struggles with nuance. It enforces rules perfectly, even when those rules no longer reflect reality. What was once seen as safety through certainty began to look like fragility through rigidity. Today, automated systems quietly govern enormous flows of value, influencing decisions far beyond their original scope. They shape incentives, behaviors, and risks in ways that few participants fully grasp. Trust did not disappear. It migrated upward into layers of abstraction most users cannot see, let alone challenge. This story is not about failure. It is about maturity, about recognizing that trust is not a flaw to be eliminated, but a responsibility to be designed carefully. Systems that ignore this truth do not become neutral. They become blind. And as more of the global economy leans on automated enforcement, the lesson becomes unavoidable. Code can execute rules. It cannot replace judgment. It can scale systems. It cannot absorb their consequences. What replaced trust was never certainty. It was speed. And speed without restraint changes everything. When